extent do participants in projects of the Environmental Health Clinic tune in to the conflicts of human and biotic systems? Or do you prefer to maintain the notion of encounter between two separate species?
It's a very interesting and important question. I think that when someone swills a cocktail with a glass eel in it, and they see the little heart beating and the beginnings of the spine, and they name it and then they release it into the aquatic ecosystem, that's certainly an encounter. It's an intimate encounter, but it initiates the possibility of a relationship and the concern for the aquatic ecosystem as they swim up the East River into the Bronx River, get blocked by dams on the way, for what one can do with this wild pet, if you will. So people may not extend their concern, but in the Cross Species Adventure Club of the Environmental Health Clinic, it gives a framework to recognize, assist, and facilitate ongoing systematic concern and relationship to figure out what can we do to make this, to facilitate the healthy, happy, productive life of an eel that is so intriguing and wondrous in its own right. When somebody wrestles a rhinoceros beetle, right, and the encounter is certainly a spectacular moment, you know, to actually feel the forces that are magnified. We actually step them up so that we amplify the rhinoceros beetle forces to human scale and human forces scaled to beetle scale. So it's an even playing field, if you will. And so, yes, it's an initial encounter, but it does demand the questions, if you enjoy it, you know, if a sport is built on wrestling with rhinoceros beetles, then you have to have rhinoceros beetles around, and what do they need, and why are they so biomechanically impossibly strong? Why are they the strongest animals in the world? You know, because they churn up the cellulose, and they aerate the soil, and they contribute to the soil biodiversity in an extraordinary way. They appear in every biome, right? So these questions can't help but come up, and the discussion can't help but come up with an encounter that turns into, or can, or might, or I would hope, turns into a systematic interrelationship where people are asking, well, what good is a rhinoceros beetle? You know, why would you wrestle a rhinoceros beetle is of course the first question I get. So I very much think that with the irreducible complexity of urban ecological systems, I don't think we can provide a plan or prescriptions that here's the answer, but we can provide ways to experiment, to ask questions, these public experiments where we hold these things to be self-evident. If the biochar works, you can see the 40% increase in growth and the greater biodiversity in the lawn, right? If the tree office works, it's because you've gone there and tried it out and thought, oh, this is actually the best working space I've ever had, right? So it's really about experiencing in small but concrete ways, experimenting with your own life and lifestyle, what works very locally, and then by demonstration there's an aggregating capacity. So if you're wrestling a rhinoceros beetle, someone else who will want to do it. If you're flying on a zip line across wetlands with 16-foot wings, it's not that you're teaching people about the value of wetlands and distributed wetlands in an urban ecosystem for saving or providing habitat for frogs and salamanders. It's that, you know, you do have this encounter, the spectacle, the initial wonder that hooks people in. But I think the work of the Environmental Health Clinic is really to provide systematic framework for experimentation, and the way to aggregate that, to recognize the diversity, but to aggregate it so that anything you might do to improve the air quality or the water quality or the plant biodiversity or the soil biodiversity, the benefits are enjoyed by anyone you share that soil, air, water, or food systems with. So it really asks people, asks participants to experiment with their own lives as art, for everyone to be an artist, for everyone to experiment with, does this work for me in my context, in my self-interest? But then I think the clinic's, the environmental health clinic job is to recognize and aggregate that, the small but evidence-driven, I would say very high standards of evidence, lifestyle experiments and public experiments, to aggregate that into significant collective action, into significant environmental remediation. Because that's the way we have to do it in this diverse, evidence-driven, engaging, convivial, participatory way. Okay, so the cultural legacy we're dealing with the inherited environmentalism and systems thinking of kind of Buckminster Fuller, kind of Californian popularized idea that we can understand and control, and systems thinking suggests systematic address. And I think there's an easy way in which systems thinking deludes us that we understand these systems that are irreducibly complex and have surprising and often unknowable consequences. So it's a legacy that we can use, but I think reinvent this socio-ecological systems design where we set up, we take responsibility for what we design, so we can set up feedback loops. So in the case of the amphibious architecture array, where the fish learn that when the lights go on, food is likely to appear, people learn that when the lights go on, fish are likely to be there, and you set up a loop that can really aggregate into significant remediation. However, you are still responsible for what is being fed, what are the consequences, how the nutrients are being transported. To the extent that you can understand and trace it, you are accountable to it. And so that puts me in the position where, although I know that this is irreducibly complex, that could lead to a paralysis or a crisis of agency of we can't do anything because, the idea is that the idea of the inherited legacy of environmentalism is that do not touch, leave no trace. Everything you do is bad, right? And I would argue that we can do something. We can make it good. And the only way we'll figure that out is to poke these complex systems in ways that we earnestly think will work and then learn from that. Not knowing that we have the answers, but having sufficient confidence in the experiment that it will produce a desirable outcome that is willing to self-correct. So I think there's things to take from systems thinking that can produce a socio-ecological systems design where credit is widely shared and blame is tightly focused. So, okay.